Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're here today. Today, we're going to talk about something that impacts families in ways we don't always see, but we definitely feel. We're talking about patterns in how we respond, how we cope, how we relate, and how those patterns can move from one generation to the next. But more importantly, we're going to talk about how those patterns can be interrupted. I want to be very clear about something from the beginning. This is not about blaming caregivers. This is not about pointing fingers at parents, families, or communities. This is about understanding and prevention. Because many of the patterns we carry were learned actually in environments where people were doing the best they could with what they had. So today is about increasing awareness, not shame. You are not responsible for everything you experience, but you do have influence over what gets passed forward. All right. So by the end of today, I want you to leave with more than just information. All right. I want you to leave with clarity and tools. You'll understand how trauma gets passed down. You'll recognize your own stress patterns. You'll learn practical strategies, not just theory. And you'll create a prevention plan that actually fits your life. Because information alone doesn't create change, application does. So, what is prevention? When we hear the word prevention, we often think of something big or clinical, right? But prevention is actually very practical. It looks like noticing stress earlier, responding differently in small moments, and building healthier habits over time. Prevention is not about eliminating stress. It's about reducing its impact and changing how it moves through your home. One of the most important things to remember is this: prevention happens in everyday moments, not just big ones. So, intergenerational trauma. What is intergenerational trauma? It is the process by which the effects of trauma gets passed down from one generation to the next. That includes emotional patterns, stress responses, beliefs, and behaviors. So, even if a child never directly experiences a traumatic event, they may still carry the impact of it. This was first identified in children of Holocaust survivors, but we now understand it affects many communities, including Black families, where trauma is often tied to systemic oppression, racism, and historical injustice. So, let me give you a real life example of what this can look like. Imagine a caregiver who grew up in a home where emotions weren't allowed. Maybe when they cried, they were told to toughen up, or maybe their feelings were ignored or dismissed. So they learned without even realizing it. The emotions or that emotions are not safe. So now let's fast forward. Their child is upset, crying, frustrated, overwhelmed. But instead of seeing just the child's emotions, their own past gets activated. And they might respond by saying, "Stop crying. You're doing too much." Or they might become irritated or just shut down entirely. Not because they don't care, but because they were never taught how to handle emotions safely. So what happens? The child learns the same lessons essentially. My emotions are too much. I need to suppress how I feel. And just like that, a pattern gets passed down. So that's what intergenerational trauma is. Not always big, obvious events, but repeated emotional experiences that shape how we are or how we respond and relate. So, how trauma gets passed down? It doesn't happen in just one way. I mean, realize that it happens through multiple pathways. Biologically, stress can impact the body and even influence how children respond to stress. Pardon me. Emotionally, unresolved feelings like fear, grief, or anger can show up in how caregivers respond to their children. Relationally, it shows up in attachment, how safe or unsafe relationships feel. And even socially, it shows up in the messages we pass down, like the world isn't safe. You have to be strong all the time, or just don't trust people. So children are learning not just from what we say, but from what we carry. I'm sorry. So, transmission pathways. So, we just talked about the different ways trauma gets passed down through behavior, emotions, environment, and parenting patterns. What research does is take these ideas and organize them into specific pathways of transmission. This helps us to understand not just that it happens, but how it happens more precisely. First, let's look at biological pathways. Trauma can affect the body's stress system. Research shows that exposure to trauma can alter how the body regulates stress, especially through hormones like cortisol. These changes can even be passed down, increasing a child's sensitivity to stress from the very beginning. Second, let's look at relational or emotional pathways. This is one of the most immediate ways trauma is transmitted. Caregivers can unintentionally pass down unresolved emotions like fear, anger, or anxiety through their responses and or their interactions. Something this looks like sometimes, pardon me, this looks like overreacting or shutting down or just difficulty staying emotionally present. Children learn how to experience and express emotion through these interactions. Third, family system patterns. These are the patterns that shape the home environment. Things like avoiding difficult conversations, emotional distance, or children taking on adult roles, or in essence, parentified. These patterns teach children what relationships are supposed to look like. Fourth, social cultural pathways. This includes the beliefs and messages that get passed down. Messages like, you have got to be strong, don't trust others, or stay on your guard, or keep your head on a swivel. As for many Black families, these messages have rooted or are rooted in real live or real lived experiences with systemic stress and historical trauma. So now we have a clearer picture. Trauma is passed down through the body, through relationships, through family patterns, and through messages. And here's why that matters, because prevention doesn't happen in one place, it happens in all of these spaces.
So now that we've talked about how trauma gets passed down through these different pathways, let's talk a little bit about what that actually looks like in real life. So, intergenerational trauma doesn't always show up in these obvious ways. Sometimes it looks like emotional patterns, so things like anxiety or feeling constantly on edge or becoming easily overwhelmed. Sometimes it also shows up relationally, so that's like difficulty trusting other people, fear of being vulnerable in relationships, or challenges kind of maintaining close, healthy relationships. And then sometimes it also shows up physically, chronic stress over time, what we often refer to as toxic stress, can impact the body. So that increasing things like your risk for illness, being more fatigued, and having other like long-term health concerns. It can also impact how people see themselves. So sometimes individuals, you know, dealing with intergenerational trauma might carry like a sense of shame or low self-worth, or what researchers sometimes call unresolved historical grief. So maintaining the emotional weight of experiences that didn't happen directly to you or to people, but are still felt, is what we're talking about when we talk about intergenerational trauma. But here's the part that we really just can't ignore, is that trauma is not just an individual experience. It's also often like historical and systemic. So for many, for example, Black families, intergenerational trauma is often tied to, the legacy of slavery, to the systemic racism that is so ingrained in our society and in our institutions, and then of course like ongoing experiences of discrimination. So experiences of racial trauma or microaggressions are also linked to intergenerational trauma. So, when we talk about stress responses or survival behaviors, we have to understand that many of the responses that we have are adaptive. They were a way that made sense of unsafe environments, and that's what has been passed on from generation to generation. And that's where prevention becomes powerful, because even though these patterns were at one point adaptive, they may no longer be serving us or our children in the same way. So, for example, there's this book by Joy DeGruy, I believe, called Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And she gives some pretty powerful examples of how this intergenerational trauma is passed down. And for example, she uses um, the example of like, there's a Black mother and a Black child who go into a bank just to like do, a transaction of sorts. And there's another mom, a white mom and a white child. And the white child is, running all over the place and doing what they want, but the Black child is like securely, at the hip of like the Black mom. And oftentimes we could say that like, this white child is just undisciplined and has the freedom to do whatever they want, and poor parenting. But also there's that notion of transgenerational trauma of, you know, historically, this Black child freely moving around, running around, had very real consequences and implications, like being kidnapped or being abused or any of those things. So, this idea of like our children needing to be disciplined, children needing to be within arm's reach, being on their best behavior. Though like has been like seen as a sense of like pride within the Black community, is also an adaptive response to what was a very real threat, you know, back in the day. So that's just like one example. But again, like I said, that's kind of where prevention comes in. Prevention is not just about like rejecting, it's not about rejecting where we came from. It really is just about asking ourselves like, what do we want to keep, and what do we want to shift? Because awareness of the impact kind of creates that opportunity for change. So kind of piggybacking on that a little bit, just kind of an opportunity to reflect a little bit. So what research shows is that these patterns continue, these adaptive responses, whether they're maladaptive or healthy, they continue whenever they stay automatic and continue to be unexamined. But the moment that we name them, we kind of begin to interrupt them. We interrupt these patterns, the transmission or yeah, the intergenerational trauma patterns become interrupted. So kind of want to give you guys the opportunity to really take a moment to really reflect on, think about, but also write them down. Like, what are some of the things, some of the behaviors, some of the things that you've adapted as a parent or grandparent, what you've learned from your parents, grandparents, etc. What are some things that you feel like you want to stop passing down? And, then on the other side, what are some things that you want to start doing instead, right? So, um, there could be different like discipline patterns. There could be different emotional responses that you want to stop. Maybe it's like yelling or cursing or whatever. Just thinking about, what do I want to stop passing down, and then what do I want to start, doing instead? Like, do I want to start having, different types of conversations? Do I want to be more vulnerable with my child? Do I want to allow my child to see me and my weak moments? Whatever that is for you. So take some time, think about that, jot them down, and then take a moment, even in this setting, to pause the recording and just take some time to really think about that. So I want to slow things down just for a quick minute, because this, what we're going to talk about next, is kind of one of the more important ideas in this workshop, and that is that when it comes to trauma, or intergenerational trauma, trauma continues when it is unrecognized, unprocessed, and unmanaged. And what that means is it's not the experience itself that's getting passed down, right? It's what happens after the experience. So when stress, for example, isn't acknowledged, when emotions, for example, aren't being processed, or when responses kind of become automatic, those patterns begin to repeat. And research on intergenerational trauma, in fact, shows that unresolved trauma, especially when it shows up in a caregiver, and their stress and emotional responses, is one of the strongest pathways through which trauma is being transmitted. So, again, unresolved trauma in caregivers is one of the main pathways through which trauma is being transmitted from parent to children. So again, it's not just what happened, it's what remains unaddressed that's continuing. So prevention, again, starts with that awareness piece, and it starts with intentional change. So awareness means, I'm noticing what I'm feeling. I notice how I'm responding. So again, you're aware of what's going on internally for you. And then intentional change means, I'm choosing to do something different, even if it's small. So overall, you can't, obviously we can't change the past. We can't change what we've inherited from our parents or from society, but we can change what continues. And one of the biggest things that determines whether we repeat patterns or interrupt them is going to be how we respond when we're stressed. So, caregiver stress is one of the most important factors when it comes to child outcomes. In fact, research indicates that in many cases, a caregiver's level of stress is a stronger predictor of a child's behavior than like a child's actual exposure to trauma. So think about it like this: children are constantly watching, constantly learning, how to respond to stress, how to regulate their emotions, what feels safe, and then what doesn't. So when a caregiver is overwhelmed or reactive or emotionally shuts down, they're not just seeing that, right? They're internalizing it, and it kind of becomes their blueprint. Research also shows that, caregivers who have experienced high levels of trauma they're still able to, of course, provide warm, sensitive, and responsive care when their stress levels are lower and better managed. So trauma history alone, again, does not determine outcomes. It's stress regulation, or one's ability to regulate stress, that really does. So this is not, of course, not about being a perfect parent. It's more so about being a more regulated parent, right? Because when stress is high and support is low, then our nervous system, starts to take over, and we react faster, we have less patience, we're more likely to respond in ways that we don't intend. So if trauma is passed down through stress and response, then prevention happens in how we manage our stress and response, our stress and how we respond in our emotions. So the first step in doing that really is recognizing what triggers you have to stress, in different moments. So again, if we know that stress plays a big role in what gets passed down, the question becomes, what triggers your stress? So, what is a trigger? Let's start there. A trigger is anything that activates a strong emotional or physical response. Sometimes this can be obvious, sometimes it's more subtle. But what makes something a trigger is not necessarily just the situation, but it's more so like how your body and your emotions respond to it. So, research shows that for many caregivers, especially those who do have, past stress or trauma, certain behaviors from children sometimes can activate what we call like emotional or body-based reactions. Sometimes these reactions are connected to past experiences. even when we're not fully aware of it in those moments. So, some common triggers, for example, might be, your child's not listening, or maybe loud noise or chaos in the home, feeling disrespected by your child, being overwhelmed or feeling overstimulated, or feeling out of control are some common triggers. And here's kind of like why this matters for prevention. Like, if you don't know what triggers you, then you can't prepare for it. And if you can't prepare for it, you're more likely to respond or react automatically. So, kind of want to start here. I want you to take a moment, just ask yourself, and of course, feel free to pause the video here. What situations tend to push me over the edge? When do I feel most overwhelmed? And then just take some time, jot those down so that you can explore them more, independently. So hopefully you were able to identify some triggers. So the next step after you've identified triggers is looking at what usually happens next. So most of us have automatic responses to stress, and these are the reactions that we've learned over time, often without even realizing it. And many of these responses come from, how we were raised, what we've experienced, or what we've had to do to cope, right? So when stress is high, our brain kind of shifts into this survival mode, which means we're more likely to react quickly, we're more likely to rely on learned patterns, and we ultimately have less access to intentional decision making during these high periods of stress. And that's kind of why these old responses tend to show up so easily in those moments. So, kind of just to like break it down a little bit, a reaction, kind of the difference between a reaction and a response. So a reaction is going to be that automatic, fast, quick, survival based response to a situation, versus a response kind of being more intentional, it's more slowed down, it's more deliberate, right? So prevention happens in that space between the trigger and the response, right? Making sure that we're not reactive in a situation, but we're actually taking the time to respond whenever we're feeling triggered. So even a small pause can create a different outcome here. So let me give you an example. For example, you have your trigger is that your child is not listening. Your old response, your normal response might be yelling, snapping, shutting down. Versus a prevention response would be like to pause, take a break, or breath, lower your voice, and deliberately choose to respond more calmly. Like another example might be like when you are feeling triggered because you're feeling overwhelmed. So, a normal or your old response might be to get a little bit more irritable, or to be emotionally withdrawn. A more prevention response, on the other hand, would look like, taking a break again, asking for help or support, or being able to openly like communicate what you need in that moment. So those are a couple examples. So I wanted you to think about, one of your triggers that you identified in the last slide, and ask yourself, what is my usual response when this happens? And then on the flip side, what would a prevention response look like instead? So think about that and jot that down. So now let's shift the focus for a moment from us to our children, because everything that we've talked about, stress, triggers, responses, also shows up in them. Children, of course, experience stress too, but they don't always have the words or skills to express it. So instead of like talking about stress, they show it through behavior. So when we see behaviors like, acting out, that might look like yelling, hitting, defiance, right? But underneath that is often frustration and overwhelm. Um, Again, if we see like shutting down again, for example, that it might look like withdrawal, silence, or like avoidance, but underneath they might be feeling afraid or feeling unsafe. Sometimes when we see our child becoming anxious, that might look like, clinginess or worry, or difficulty calming down, or we might see our child like trying to control everything. So you might say like power struggles or something like that, but really what's underneath that could be a need for safety and predictability. So research on trauma and child development shows that when children are exposed to stress, especially in environments where regulation is inconsistent, they might develop difficulties with emotional regulation, behavioral issues, and even attention. And importantly, these behaviors are often adaptations. They're not defiance, right? So instead of asking, what's wrong with my child, we kind of need to start by asking, what is my child feeling? What is this behavior trying to communicate? Because how we respond in these moments when our children are stressed, it teaches children, right? It teaches them, how to understand their emotions, teaches them how to regulate and whether they are safe, when they're struggling, right? And this slide here is just a good reminder that, children, they don't just hear stress, they absorb it through tone, through energy, through emotional climate. So, of course, like stress is a natural part of life. Like, that's not something that we can prevent, but making sure that when we're navigating our stress, we're navigating it in a way that's productive, not only for ourselves, but for our kids' sakes too. Obviously, like we don't want our kids to inherit some of the stress, the unhealthy or maladaptive stress responses or reactions that we have and carry that forward throughout their life.
So now that we've talked about how trauma is passed down, let's shift over to prevention. So we will discuss three prevention windows of opportunity. First being in early development, from before the child is born to early childhood, which is around 7 or 8 years old. Then we'll talk about the adolescence window, and then we'll talk about the narrative and communication. Um, these windows shape how trauma is carried or interrupted. So early early childhood development. Children are highly sensitive to caregiver stress, whether it's the stress of their parents, the stress of grandparents, or whoever is their caretaker, because they are still exploring the world around them. They are still soaking in all the information around them like a sponge. Okay. And these early experiences shape the development of their brains and also the development of their emo- emotional regulation skills. And these early experiences also shape how they attach themselves and develop relationships through these experiences. So these early experiences not only shape their physical brain, but like the hippocampus and other areas that are developing at this time, but they also shape the emotional attachments that they have with others. Next, we get into the adolescent window. Um, the patterns and attachments and relationships and understandings that were developed in early childhood are now put to the test in adolescence. Whether it's the um, heightened emotions that they experience through due to puberty, or the development of their identity. Um, the patterns that were developed in early childhood are put to the test now, and they may resurface. You may have thought, "Oh, I thought they outgrew this," or I thought it just went away, but it may resurface in adolescence as they experience other stressful situations because of the flux of emotions and the chemicals and the continued the development of their brains. They're more sensitive to stress and conflict, especially stress and conflict that impact their relationships. So even though during this stage adolescents tend to shy away from their parents and more to their friends, this is when they need more support and guidance to interrupt the negative patterns from solidifying as their as their brain continues to fully develop and their identity continues to develop. So throughout the early childhood window and the adolescent window, there are opportunities to change the narrative. There are opportunities to clearly communicate what's going on in these stressful situations. How families talk about stress shape its understanding and shape how children and adolescents understand stressful situations. So have a have age appropriate conversations with your children to reduce feelings of confusion and fear. And on the other side of that, not having these conversations, staying silent or avoiding these conversations can actually reinforce the stress that they internally are experiencing, even if they don't share it. So, where do you come in? You have a powerful influence in all three of these windows. Um, how you respond, how you develop that relationship with your child, and how you communicate with your child can help prevent negative patterns from developing. Okay, now that we have discussed the three windows in which you have opportunity, let's talk about the three everyday things that we can do to help pre- prevent stressful situations. So, the first phase is the before step, right? The preparation step. This step looks like preparing yourself. So, anticipating stressful situations, setting realistic expectations for yourself and others, creating structured routines that are easy to follow and that are followed consistently, and then, of course, taking care of your own emotional needs. Whoa. Um, this preparation phase helps to reduce reactivity and improve our responses in the moment. So when we get to in the moment, in the present of those stressful situations, self regulation is very important. So taking a pause before you react, right? Um, taking a deep breath or stepping away, whatever it is that helps you to hold yourself in that present moment from reacting in a way that you do not want. Um, pr- 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 Practice lowering your tone and evening your rate of speech because fast pace speech or too low rate of speech can invoke a negative or undesired response in the listener, especially children. And then, of course, staying focused on being grounded in the moment, staying in the present moment is very important for self regulation. But of course, nobody's perfect. So even though we prepare ourselves and we try our best and we try our best to self regulate in the moment, we do not always get it right. And so it's important for after a stressful situation, we choose to repair the connection with our child. Taking accountability for your response. Saying if you made a mistake and reacted in a way that you did not want or that you shouldn't have, taking accountability and saying, hey, I'm sorry for responding like that. Okay? Validating emotions, both your own emotions and their emotions, because the more you validate emotions in the moment, it it brings a greater understanding of the emotions that we have in stressful situations. And all these repair steps help to reinforce safety and trust, thus helping to strengthen and repair the relationship. So overall, repair is prevention. Perfection is not required, but consistent accountability is what truly makes a difference. And repairing um, after stressful situations teaches that you are a safe space, that they can trust you, and also teaches them how to build resilience in stressful situations. So now let's discuss some core prevention skills. The main goals of these skills are to regulate yourself and strengthen the relationship with your child. These skills will help interrupt automatic emotional reactions while cultivating intentional responses. They help to build a connection with with your child, ultimately will hit the goal of passing on um, solid coping skills to your children and to the next generation. So, skill number one is to regulate first. If you've ever flown on an airplane and they give their safety demonstration, they always say, in the case of an emergency, a mask may fall down from the ceiling. And so they also say for you to have your own mask set first before trying to help somebody else. Because if you are not receiving what you need, the oxygen in that situation, um, you won't be much help to helping others. Okay. So notice how your body feels when it's activated. Is my chest tight? Is my heart beating fast? Am I irritable? And that goes in hand with knowing your triggers. What are certain things that trigger you? Is it loud? Is it loud noises? Is it disrespect? Is it being overwhelmed? Right? Knowing what triggers you is important. And so after you've acknowledged how your body feels and you understand your triggers, it's important to pause before responding so that your mind has an opportunity to remind you of the coping skills of taking a deep breath, lowering your voice, taking a step away for a brief moment to center yourself in the moment. Self regulation creates safety because you are taking control of the situation instead of stress controlling you. Skill number two is to name your emotions. We all know happy, sad, and mad. But there are so many other words for all the variety of emotions that we feel on a day-to-day basis, especially in stressful situations. So it's very important for you to identify your emotions in that moment. And you can only do that if you understand all the different words and all the different types of emotions that you may experience. And the more emotions that you understand, that gives you more power over them. And when you are naming your feelings and naming your emotions, that also helps your child to label theirs because you're having that conversation with them. You are acknowledging how they feel. You are normalizing their emotions with clear and simple language so that they can develop those emotion labels themselves as well. And that builds emotional awareness both in you and in your child. Skill number 3, respond, don't react. Reactions in stressful situations are automatic and emotion driven, while responses are intentional and thoughtful. The emotions come out of our instinct, out of our survival instincts, while our responses come from our prefrontal cortex and the thinking part of our brain, which is very important. So in order to respond instead of react, you have to slow yourself down because stressful situations can be very fast paced. And that even means slowing down the racing thoughts that you may have. And slowing down those racing thoughts will help you slow down your words and slow down your actions, which ultimately lead to slowing down of your behavior and your responses so that you can be more intentional and help to make the right choice in the moment. Skill number 4 is to model healthy coping. How do you handle stress in the moment, in real time? If you have some healthy skills, show that to your child. Demonstrate what those calm down strategies look like. Express your emotions in a healthy way and stay, of course, in the moment. Children see everything that we do and they soak it in like a sponge. So if you want to help your child develop a strong, healthy blueprint for their coping skills, they need to see that in you. And the last skill is repair and reconnect. As adults, sometimes we have a hard time admitting when we're wrong. But this skill in stressful situations is vitally important for the prevention of a similar stressful situation in the future. So acknowledge the things that didn't go well. Maybe I didn't do a good job at utilizing my coping skills. Maybe I didn't take accountability and I placed blame on others. Right? Acknowledge what didn't go well and take accountability for your actions, making sure you reinforce to your child that it is not their fault that you reacted that way. No one can make you react in a way but you. So do not blame others, especially children, on your actions and your choices. But it's important that you also say that to your child, hey, this is not your fault. You did not cause this, because children will internalize it and make it their own before they ever tell us. And so it's in this reconnection and repairing process that you reconnect emotionally. That's the acknowledging how you felt and acknowledging how they felt, talking about your feelings, talking about what was going on in their thoughts. And then, of course, this helps to rebuild safety and trust, thus strengthening the overall relationship.
So we're now going a little deeper. We've talked about skills, what to do in the moment, but underneath those skills is something even more important: self regulation and personal healing. In order to respond differently, we have to be able to manage what's happening inside of us. So, unresolved experiences from our past can certainly show up in our present moments, especially as parents or in parenting. Sometimes a child's behavior doesn't just feel frustrating, it feels triggering. because it connects to something deeper. This might look like reacting more strongly than expected, feeling overwhelmed quickly, or having emotional responses that seem bigger than the actual situation. And often that's not just about the present moment, it's connected to the past. So, prevention at a deeper level means not just managing behavior, but learning how to manage your internal responses. And so, this includes recognizing when you're triggered, slowing your body down, and creating space between feeling and action. And it also includes doing the work of processing past experiences, separating your past from your child's present, and making sure that your child is not carrying what belongs to you. This is not about blaming yourself for the past. It's just about making sure the past doesn't contribute to shape the future. And this doesn't have to be overwhelming. It really doesn't. Healing can look like reflection, conversations, support, or even small moments of awareness and change. So, mentalizing or understanding your child. So, let's look at that. Let's talk about how you understand those responses and, but more importantly, how you understand your child. This is what we call understanding yourself and your child as emotional beings, or more simply, being able to ask, what am I feeling right now? What might my child be feeling? Research refers to this as mentalization or reflective functioning. It's the ability to recognize that your child has thoughts, feelings, and needs, and those inner experiences drive their behaviors. So instead of just reacting to behavior, we start to get curious about just what's underneath it. So instead of, why are you acting like that? We ask, what might they be feeling right now? This is powerful for prevention because when we understand what's underneath behavior, we respond differently. We become less reactive and more intentional. And this also applies to you. Just being able to recognize, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm getting triggered, helps you stay in control of your own responses. For example, instead of seeing defiance, you might recognize they're overwhelmed, they're frustrated, they need support. When you understand what's underneath behavior, you change how you respond to it. So, communication and boundaries. Prevention is not just what we feel, it's about how we express it and how we structure relationships. Clear, healthy communication helps reduce emotional confusion, prevent misinterpretation, and creates emotional safety for children. But it also helps define psychological boundaries, what belongs to the parent and what belongs to the child. One of the most important or helpful tools here is using the I statements. Instead of you're being difficult, we say, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. This does two things. It helps keep you accountable for your own emotions. It prevents placing blame or emotional weight on your child. So, boundaries are also a key part of prevention. They help make sure that children are not taking on adult emotional roles and they are not responsible for managing your feelings. Research called this preventing parentification. When children feel responsible for supporting a caregiver emotionally, so healthy boundaries also protect against that. So when communication is clear and boundaries are healthy, children feel safer, more secure, and more able to regulate themselves. For example, instead of saying, you're stressing me out, you might say, I'm feeling overwhelmed. So I'm going to take a moment. Clear communication and healthy boundaries protect you and your child. So the final piece is this: how we make meaning of our experiences. The way we understand and talk about our experiences shapes how they are carried forward. So, research shows that when families create clear, supportive narratives about their experiences, children are less likely to internalize fear, confusion, or shame. What we say about our experiences helps children answer questions like, well, what does this mean about me? Or what does this mean about my family? Am I safe? When there is silence or when experiences are not clearly explained, children often fill in the gaps themselves, and that can lead to misunderstanding, fear, or blaming themselves. So, prevention is not just about what happened, it's about how we reframed or how we framed what happened. For example, instead of a story rooted only in struggle, we can also tell a story of strength and resilience, survival, and growth, especially in Black families. This can include cultural pride, historical resilience, and strength in the face of adversity. You are not just passing down experiences, you are passing down meaning.
So now we're kind of bringing everything we've talked about into one central idea, and that is creating safety through your parenting. One of the most powerful ways to interrupt the cycle of trauma is by creating a sense of emotional safety for your child. So, connection and secure relationships are some of the strongest protective factors against the impact of stress and trauma. Not perfection, right? But connection. So, this can look like showing warmth and affection, letting your child feel cared for, valued, and supported. It looks like, interpreting behavior with compassion. So, seeing behavior as communication, not as defiance, not as disrespect. I mean, obviously, those are important considerations, but being willing to look beyond the surface, right? Also, staying engaged and being emotionally present. So, being available even in those difficult moments. And then, importantly, responding without personalizing. I know that's tough, but not taking behavior as an attack, but really taking the time to understand it as a need or an emotional response. So instead of thinking or saying like they're disrespecting me, right? We want to shift to like, something's going on right now for them. So these small shifts kind of can change everything, right? Because when a child feels safe in the relationship, they're better able to regulate their own emotions, they're better able to handle stress, and then over time they're building resilience. So connection really is the strongest protective factor against, trauma and stress. I want to pause here and say something that is really important, and that is you don't have to do this alone, right? Everything that we've talked about today, a regulation, communication, prevention, these are not meant to be carried by you by yourself, right? Research actually shows that caregivers who feel like supported, who feel connected and well resourced are more likely to respond intentionally, to manage stress effectively, and to create an overall healthier environment for their children. So, what does this look like? It could look like, just building confidence in your parenting, trusting that you are capable of growth and change, right? Seeking support when needed, knowing when you need support and looking for it, right? Whether it's through therapy, whether it's through trusted friends or family, whether it's from like outside guidance or community support, making sure that you're getting support when you need it. And then along with that comes using resources in your community. So leaning into spaces that support you, not, staying or in situations that isolate you, and teaching your children pride, identity, and resilience that helps them to really develop a strong sense of who they are, and the ability to just navigate challenges more effectively. So for many Black families, this also includes, cultural pride, strength-based identity, and preparing children to kind of navigate real world experiences. When caregivers feel supported, they are more emotionally available and more consistent in their responses, and that strengthens prevention. So thinking, like, think about it. Support strengthens prevention. So getting support is not a weakness, right? It's a part of breaking the cycle. So now we're going to take everything we've talked about and make it personal. So this is going to be your prevention plan. So this is where you want to take out your handy dandy notebooks or continue to write here. Take a moment to pause, screenshot whatever you need to do. And we're going to take a moment here to kind of develop your prevention plan. Again, this is not about perfection. It's really just about being intentional. So small, consistent changes over time that have the potential to to make a powerful impact. So I want you to take a moment and just think about this for yourself. What is one of your biggest triggers, right? What situations tend to overwhelm you or push you to react? And then think about, what is a new response you want to practice, or what would it look like to respond differently in that moment? And then what do you want to model for your child? How do you want them to learn to handle stress, emotions, or conflict? And then lastly, how will you repair when needed? Because it's not if, right? It's when. What will it look like to reconnect and rebuild? Just take a moment to write something down, even if it's just one thing. This really is what prevention looks like in real life. It's not big. There's not these big perfect moments, right? But it's intentional choices in everyday situations. You're already influencing your child. So this is really just about becoming more intentional about how you're influencing your child. So as we come to a close, we want to leave you with kind of one final question. And that is, what cycle ends with you? And that cycle might be reacting in anger, shutting down emotionally, avoiding hard conversations, carrying everything alone, or passing down fear instead of safety. Whatever it is for you, just take a moment to kind of name that. And then ask yourself, what is one commitment that I want to make moving forward? Not 10 things, not everything at once, just one thing, one intentional shift, one new response that you want to have, one way of showing up differently. Just think of one commitment that you're willing to make moving forward. Um, you do not have to change everything today. You should not even strive to make, tomorrow is going to be the start of a new, it's all about making one intentional change that will begin to shift what gets passed forward. So, one last thing that we want to leave you with is this, that you have the power to change patterns, not because everything is going to be perfect, but because even small shifts in how you respond can create something different over time. Small changes matter. The way you pause instead of react, the way you repair after a hard moment, the way you choose connections, all these moments add up. Awareness plus action leads to transformation. You're not just reacting to what you experience, you're redefining what's getting passed forward or getting passed down. That you have the potential to be the interruption in this intergenerational trauma pathway. If you've made it to the final minutes of this presentation, we are, of course, so grateful that you all, joined in, took your time to learn, not just for the sake of like showing up for us and supporting us, but really for showing up for yourself and for your children and, generations to come, and really being able to interrupt this pattern of transgenerational trauma that we are seeing so prevalent, especially within the Black community. So we would really, really appreciate if you would take just a moment to complete this post-workshop survey. Just go ahead and scan the QR code here. We look forward to hearing about your experience. Feel free to be honest. Let us know things that you wish you would have learned, things that you really enjoyed learning, things you want more of. Just let us know. Thanks again for coming. Hope that you got something out of it. Again, thanks for showing up for yourself and your family.